So good morning to everyone, and here we are again with Narad. Now, Narad, most of us, at least my generation, we connect you with the Matrimandir nursery and your whole relationship with plants and flowers. But I'm sure there's more to it than just that. It would be very, very revelatory for us to see your experience of Aurobindo in its totality.
There's only one thing I can begin with, and that's Mother's words to me. And the way she wanted the gardens to be built. And I quote, "It must be a thing of great beauty, of such a beauty that when men enter, they will say, 'Ah, this is it.' Mm-hmm. And they will experience physically and concretely the significance of each garden. In the garden of youth, they will know youth. In the garden of bliss, they will know bliss," and so forth. And then Mother raised her hand, and she did this. "One must know how to move from consciousness to consciousness." And that was my directive for the Matrimandir Gardens. Now, you were in Aurobindo too?
Yeah.
Roughly at the same time?
Well,
early 70s?
I started working in 75, but of course I was going to the Matrimandir as a student to work on the Matrimandir.
Ah.
Every morning on Tuesdays and Saturdays, yes.
Well, we were put up at in Moratandi at Promes.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to go to where Mother, to the area Mother called the center, the area she called peace.
Mm-hmm.
And look, was there any place at all where there could be some protection for the plants and the people? It was barren. A couple of palm trees and desert all around. We could look from the Matrimandir to the sea. Right. We could look from the Matrimandir up to Ginji.
Right.
So I walked down this little dirt road, and there was a grove of mango trees with the road forming a barrier on one side, and at the very back there was a huge canyon.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I feel this is it. So I wrote to Mother, and she blessed it as the place to begin. And, well, I can begin with so many experiences. I'd like to begin with the great blessing that I had of taking Narad and Champaklal up to the chamber for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't even completely finished then, and Champaklal just didn't want to leave. There was such a power Mother had already put in there. And then I did the same with Aurobindo Basu, and brought them all to the nursery, because Champaklal loved flowers, and it was very special. I have photos of Champaklal looking at all the tables. This is what we would do on Mother's birthday, 1970, 71, 72. We would have a flower show.
Mm-hmm.
You might remember.
I remember. It was lovely, absolutely.
And one year we had more than 400 flowers.
Yeah.
And there was such collaboration. Ray and Deborah at the pottery. What's it called? Golden Bridge?
Golden Bridge.
Golden Bridge Pottery would make the little vases.
Right.
And then someone would do the calligraphy for Mother's Significances. And Mary Helen would do the flower arrangements. And the boys would all help with the tables and the tablecloths, and the whole nursery was shining.
Yeah.
And buses would come from the ashram, and people still talk to me about it today.
Yes.
I remember Pushpa and Leela saying, you know, we remember those days
Yes.
because it was just vibrant with Mother's presence.
And
So-
there's a quality of luminosity, you know. I remember at the nursery, this presence of light that was,
I see.
yes, which lately has kind of reduced. You know, the sense of luminosity that was there at that time.
Yeah, it's completely changed
Yeah,
now,
yes.
unfortunately. They're even going to demolish it
Uh-huh.
because it's in the wrong zone.
The zone.
Well, there are so many things to tell you about. My goodness. One was that I started a class for the youngest, 5, 6, 7 years old. And we had a garden class every Wednesday. And the kids would do all kinds of things. And Neil Oro actually grafted the first rainbow plumeria with different colors onto one trunk. He did it at 5 years old. And then Shally would be there, and there was this great bird, Akhenaten, who we all called Ankh, that Dietra, who later Claire, who later became
Right.
Dietra, I guess it was. She would care for all the birds, remember, in certitude.
Yes.
And this bird loved that children's class. And every Wednesday he would be there, and he would fly from branch to branch. And his favorite trick was to swoop down and take Shally's cap up into a tree and then drop it and laugh. Well, he followed those children everywhere. And it was such an experience. I have to tell you a bit about Ankh because I had never had an experience with a bird like that. He would fly at breakfast time, and if we had one of those buns in our hand, it would be gone and we would never feel it. That's how, but we wouldn't even hear him. He would take it right out of our hand.
What kind of a bird was it?
A Brahmini kite.
Ah, okay.
Big
Okay.
fellow,
Yeah,
big
yeah.
fellow. So one day, we built a house there, although Mother wanted us to have a house built at peace. And she said, I want you to have the first house at peace. But she told Navajata, but it was never done. It's okay. One day, coming out of the room, I had a small piece of cheese in my hand. Whew! Swoops down onto the terrace, onto the lattice work that we
Yes.
had there. And you remember it, the big
Yes.
lattice that was over there. I had Krishna's light in the mind all over it, and unselfishness, those two flowers. And he looks at me, and I said, Ankh, would you like a piece of cheese? And I hold it up to him, and he delicately takes it out of my hand and flies away. Well, now this goes on for about 2 months. Every other day, Ankh is there waiting for his cheese. And then one day, I hear this screeching sound up in the sky. I see a dot, maybe 2 dots, I don't know. And then suddenly, whew, Ankh is there. But the screeching continues, and he's calling. He found a mate.
Ah,
And she came down onto the trellis. Well, she wouldn't come near me. She was so frightened. But the two of them stood together. And after his cheese, he flew away, and I never saw him again. I want to tell you about the green belt. We grew thousands of trees in small plastic bags from seed, and sometimes we grew as many as 10,000 in a year and distributed them to the green belt. And people, when I go to the green belt today, I got to show you the tree that's now 50-something years old, and it's this giant thing from that little seedling that I gave them. Another thing that was really special, Maurice, is that we had this deep contact with the different chief conservators of forests. And I have letters from them of their experience in the Matrimondia Gardens nursery. And just, in fact, they would take me on trips to the Western Ghats to collect seeds.
Right.
And, there was just, I don't know if any of that exists now, but it was a moment in history when there was such respect for Auroville and collaboration between the government and what we were doing. Oh, plant collections. I was determined, and I said this in a prayer to Mother, to bring the most beautiful flowers for the gardens to her. And so I began a schedule of 12 visits a year to all the gardens in Madras, 4 visits a year to the gardens in Bangalore, especially Lal Bagh, and 1 visit a year to another state, Calcutta,
Right.
Bombay, whatever. Well, the people in Los Angeles at the East-West Cultural Center helped me before I left by collecting hundreds of different kinds of seeds, which I grew. Beautiful trees, flowering trees, shade trees. So one day I filled a van full of these and drove to the Lal Bagh and donated them all and met the director of the Lal Bagh, Dr. Mari Gowda. Well, that began a long relationship. And that very day, he gave me 12 new hibiscus from Hawaii that he had received. And 11 of these I sent to Mother. And I tell you, I would stand by the Samadhi and listen to her saying, "Superb, magnifique." I mean, her voice was so powerful. I mean, and this is when we're talking 1970, 71.
Right.
And we know what she was going through, what her body was doing for the earth. And she named all of these for Auroville, almost all for Auroville. Charm of Auroville, beauty of Auroville, realization of Auroville. And then one day she said to Tara, "We need to have a bit wider name also." And she said, "Charm of the new creation, beauty of the new creation." So we know Auroville is the new creation. And then I began sending her flowers on a regular basis. Every time something new came into bloom. I think maybe she named about 10 different zinnias, like Joyful Endurance, and some were named, but they were tiny little things. I got these big flowers, and she loved them. And then one day, I sent her a little flower from seeds that I received from England. And this is very important because the name is Lobelia erinus, Cambridge blue. And it flowered. And it was the blue of Sri Aurobindo and Krishna and Mother named it Remembrance of Sri Aurobindo. That was for me. But then I grew the Italian basil, which we love so much, with the big leaf.
Yes, yes.
Joy of union with the divine.
Oh, that's what it is called.
Yeah.
The flower of the basil.
The flower of the basil. Joy of union with the divine. And then I got a myrtle plant. And the flower of that myrtle she named To Live Only for the Divine.
Mm-hmm.
And there were so many. I mean, it was a time for me, despite all the difficulties.
Right,
And you know, we had very little water, and Diana told Mother that we needed a well, and Mother said yes. But there was a pump house, and it was about 300 meters from the nursery.
Right.
And we would have to go every night to turn that pump on to fill the tanks in the nursery. And there were vipers and cobras and everything in those days. In fact, a crate killed our little calf. She was just not 8, 9 months old. Just in 5 minutes she was gone. There's nothing you can do with a crate bite. Right. It's too fast. And you know, you and I talked about the heat and the lack of, and the current cuts and all. But when she was there, nothing mattered. One could go through anything.
How did you, or when did you decide, or Mother decided for you that you should shift to Auroville?
1970.
70.
Yeah. And they built a keat structure, you might remember, at the center. It was called the center.
Yes, yes.
It's very interesting, too, because in those days, there was still not the difficulty with ashram and Auroville. That originally was because of people coming into Auroville with drugs.
Right, right.
And Mother said no rules for Auroville, but she had to give that one rule, no drugs. No. So in those days, two very important things happened. We had a little room in that structure where we had a number of rooms for people to stay. Jack and Mary Alexander were there, I remember. Well, that room was a kind of meditation room. Mm-hmm. And every week, Madhav Pandit used to come out and talk to us. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he was really for Mother's dream of Auroville. And he brought the yoga to those people who had never known about it. And Aurobindo Basu used to come out once a month. It's the only two. But it meant so much to me. Then I started reading Auroville, and Mother said she gave me blessings. She wanted me to read Auroville once a week to any Aurovillians who would come. I did it for 10 years, every week. Mm-hmm. And that was an experience also.
Because that indeed, in fact, that key, that secret that the Mother has given us in the Charter of being a willing servitor of the divine consciousness, I think that is the yoga that Auroville needs to focus on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, she's written so much about Auroville. Gilles Guigan is now the archivist and finding all other things. He's given me 2 books that big, one on the Matrimandia, one on Auroville,
right,
with all she said. If people would only read that, they would know. Well, the next thing, I guess, is to talk about Roger and Jacqueline and Paolo. We had great hopes that they would work together. And you may remember the exhibition of the gardens that Paolo put up at the little room in the Matrimandia. But it was against Roger's ideas, and none of it, there was no collaboration never happened with the two of them. But Mother supported Roger just as she would support Pranab all through their lives. She never gave up on one of us.
Yeah.
Never. when we experienced all these problems in Aurobindo, and I've told you that about different groups attempting to take over Aurobindo, I left in 1981.
Okay.
And at that time, it was so difficult. And we stayed away for quite some years, 16 years, in fact.
And was it the disharmony around that
Yeah.
triggered the...
It was too much for Mary Helen.
Right.
Her soul was far too filled with peace and a quiet humility, and she couldn't take it. And so she went back in September of 80, and I said, I'll come in March of 81. And then I said, I'll go back. I'll stay 3 months and go back. Well, I never went back. It seemed to be that Mother wanted me to be with her.
Mm-hmm.
And she proposed to me. So we got married and built a business called Tropical Plant Specialists,
Mm-hmm.
in which we would propagate and sell plants all over the country, which in the end was the perfect thing for me for the future gardens. But I tell you, Maurice, for 37 years, I felt pain and guilt for not being able to catch Mother's vision of the gardens. And one day I went to Aurobindo and I told him this. In a very strong voice, he said to me, "Get rid of the guilt. The gardens are not yet ready to descend." Oh, that gave me a... So...
I suppose the people were not ready to
Yes, exactly.
get the gardens.
And if we can become open, they will descend in us
Right.
and be realized physically on the earth. And now there's a small group. 2 weeks ago, they asked me to come out. They said, "We want to start the gardens in the way that Mother said. Will you come and meditate with us?" And I did.
Mhm.
And they want to have another one soon. So there is a sincere aspiration being expressed that it be done in her way. I mean, she has named the gardens in a certain order, and we
Yes.
have to create them in that order. Now they're trying to jump here and there, but existence, consciousness, and bliss, Satchidananda, ends with perfection,
Right.
garden of perfection.
It's wonderful to see in a way you're a kind of a symbolic bridge between the ashram and Auroville, and these bridges are becoming increasingly, I think, crucial to the survival of the mother's dream. These 16 years you were out. How did you live these 16 years? Was it very difficult psychologically to be physically away from this space? Or the inner connection with the mother was constant?
That never stopped. Obviously never stopped. But the connection with Auroville was very evanescent.
Mm-hmm.
People would write at times. They would write to me about the service tree, and I would answer about the service tree. But it was a time where we had to just step back from all of that. And then, after Mary Helen left, 2002, I was back.
Mm-hmm.
I had to see her through that. And I want to tell you that how she bore that cancer with such trust in Mother, and never a complaint. I mean, Ovarian cancer is the worst because they can't detect it until it's too late. In the last day of her life, last 2 days, the day before she said to me, smiled at me, and she said, "No more. Pain was too much." I took her to the hospital, and the ladies there looked at her and they said, "We have to treat this very vigorously." And so they gave her Dilaudid. And I was there with her every moment. And what happened was, on the last day, she opens her eyes and looks at me. And in the sweetest voice she says, "You are my friend and my salvation." And then closes her eyes again. All night long, I sing Om. Hours and hours and hours. The nurses must have come in and stood around or something, because the next day, when she left, I got this beautiful card where they wrote Namaste. This is people in a Southern Baptist area. So the morning comes, and Mary Helen is preparing to leave. The breath is slowing down. And I see that she's going. So I just say a few words. I say, "I am praying to Sri Aurobindo and Mother for you." And out of that soft voice she says, "I am too." And she smiles at me. And stupid me says, "You are?" And then with this radiant smile, she leaves the body and she says, "Of course." And she's gone. And then I read a passage from Savitri when all of the nurses and doctors, and a minister came in. He was very annoyed. It was all right.
Why don't you tell us something about Chali?
Yeah. Shali grew up with all those children in Auroville in the early days. Tim raised 2 children, and so many others. And
Where was she born?
she was born in America, but at 1 year she came here,
Okay.
and Udar put her on Mother's lap.
Okay.
And Mother held her, and Mother said, you'll have to translate, très, très sage et très gentil.
Lovely.
Means
So very, very well
wise.
behaved, wise and
Yeah.
gentle
and gentle, yeah.
child.
So she grew up there, and she loved everything about it. She just, Auroville was for this child everything. I remember we got a bullock once. My young maestri, who was 18 years old, "I'll find you a good bullock, a good animal." So he found one. He might have made some money off him, but this thing wouldn't pull. He wouldn't pull a little child's
Tram.
And Shelley named him Henry. So after about a year of struggling with this fellow, Sundamurti says to me, "We need to find a new Henry." Well,
So Shelley, she slipped into Auroville seamlessly.
seamlessly, and was with us all those years.
Yeah.
And then we all went back, because she went back with Mary Helen
Right,
and me.
right.
Well, this is the most incredible story, because now I have a wife and a child to support, and no place to live, and $400 to my name.
Right.
Well, the plumeria was the flower that spoke most to me. And I collected from all over the world almost 300 varieties. Became known all over. In fact, in Thailand, they have a garden of our plumerias, Matrimondia plumerias. and others. Well, there was a lady in Houston, Texas, Elizabeth Thornton, who had founded the Plumeria Society of America.
Oh,
And she said, would you address our annual convention? Because we had been corresponding. She knew I would be in the U.S. She said, we'll give you an honorarium of $500 and pay your expenses. Well, I had $400. So I get there, give the talk, and the people are very, very warm. And there's a man there, and he's, there's a lady there who lives in River Oaks, the millionaires area of Houston, and they want to give a party for me in a couple of minutes. So I go to the party, and I meet this man. And he says to me, I have a nursery that's failing, and if you would take it over, I'll give you half again. This is the old story. Well, I did that, and it became very popular. And then the largest nursery in Houston wanted to buy him out and asked me to be the manager of their nursery. Can you imagine I grossed $10 million the first year? Retail sales. Well, okay. This fellow says to me, I have this nursery. You'll get half. Would $3,000 a month be acceptable? I said, it would be all right. So immediately, within days, Mother arranged everything. Right. In fact, I tell people that Mother opened every door, and the only thing I had to do was walk through. Right. All this time.
Aspire and walk through.
Yes, yes. And Shally got through high school, and it was the first time, Maurice, that she had ever experienced reverse prejudice, because the black girls dissed her. And she came home in tears one day. She had never known that. Black, white, what didn't matter to her. She was a child of Aurobindo.
Right.
So then she went to college in Galveston.
How old was she when she left Aurobindo?
Ready to go into the first year of high school.
Okay.
So that would be 12 maybe?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, because we were there 10 years. I was there 12 years.
Right.
Yeah, so 12, 13 maybe, 13.
Okay.
Okay, so here's what happens. She graduates. And she's doing neonatal studies with and writing papers as well. Comes to us one day and she says, "May I have your blessing to go back to Aurobindo?
Mm-hmm.
It's my home." And of course we said yes. And that was it. She's never left.
Right. 20
years building the high school.
Absolutely.
And overseeing it. There was no high school before.
Yes, yes.
She built it with Luke, the son of Tina and Walter, and Tina and I have worked in the gardens together for years. But then he left, and it was all in her care. Now she's on the top boards, working a little too much. But that's the nature of Aurobindo now. Those few people who are truly sincere have to do so much now.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to tell you about my visits to the Theosophical Society. They actually made me a member because I donated plants to them and all. But I met a man, his name was Yagna Shastri. And I had never met a man before who loved trees so much. And he would take me to one, and the tears would just flow from his eyes. And he gave me everything that he could for the Matrimandir. There was another man, B.A. Rama Rao. he was my bougainvillea guru. He taught me so much about bougainvilleas. You see, the people came from all over. I met Dr. B.P. Pal, who was a bougainvillea expert. I met Dr. M.S. Randhawa in Delhi, and all of them were. I mean, it was as if Mother had touched
Right.
the whole of India to help Aurobindo.
Did you ever meet Krishnamurti?
I met him he was standing on his balcony and we said good morning to each other. Prema Srinivasan was his dear disciple, and I would visit her, a few times a year to do work in her famous garden in Adyar.
Right.
You know the,
Yes, yeah.
what is it, the freight company that he, Tia, probably the largest lorries and firm and builders in
The TVS.
TVS Sundaram.
Yes, yes.
TVS
TVS
Sundaram. Yeah.
yes.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of Aurobindo. I would like to tell you a story about my friend Danny, who passed away on my birthday. Daniel Wilms. I never had to work like that. Day and night meant nothing to him. He worked all the time. He was a bit troubled at times, but many years later, I was invited to the Nong Nooch Botanical Garden in Thailand, where they had the Plumeria collection and many others. So I asked Danny if he was living in Thailand he married a Japanese girl. And he came, and another fellow from Holland who worked with me in the nursery, and the three of us met years later now in this wonderful, wonderful garden. And one day, I come into the room, and there's Danny prostrate before Mother and Sri Aurobindo. And we got to share some stories, and he told me this wonderful story that I have to tell you. He goes to a Vipassana meditation with a really realized Buddhist monk. And the people are all in line to go past the monk, and he speaks to each of them. And he looks at Danny and he says, "Oh, you are from another nest, but welcome." He knew Mother Sri Aurobindo right away.
Yeah.
Interesting. And this is an aside, but I didn't get to tell you the other day, and it's very important to share it with you, because Mother made this possible also. So I'm back in America, and my mother comes to our wedding, Mary Helen and I, in Missouri, and she gets breast cancer. I've had 3 of them, my sister with cancer, my mother with cancer, and Mary Helen with cancer, and had to go through all of their deaths. But my mother was special. She was a bit of manipulative, overly emotional, a bit of a challenge. So anyway, I get a call one day from one of my aunts, and she says, "You better come. It's getting close." And I come, and I come in the front door, which I don't usually do. And I said, "Hi, Mom. I was in the area, just wanted to come and say hello." "Baloney," she says, "I know why you're here." She said, "I will not go to a hospital. I will die in the living room of my house. I want a casket with pink and blue silk." Planned the whole thing out, right? And my father, of course, they fought all the time. And I had to leave the house when I was in my mid-teens because it was too much. And this is how Mother made the break, see.
Right.
This was one of them. Anyway, the last day comes. She's in tremendous pain, and my father, he can't do the injections. My aunts are totally hopeless. They're just crying all the time. I have to give my mother injections for the pain. So I do that, and I have to see to her oxygen. Now, the most extraordinary thing happens here. My father's on her right side, I'm on her left side as she's lying down. Comes the time just about when she's about to leave the body, totally rigid. I don't see how this happened. She turns her head and her body to my father and gives him this smile that all is fine and the love has never changed, despite the outward personality.
Right.
And then she comes back, and she dies. And the peace that Sri Aurobindo speaks of descends into the house. The sisters stop crying. There's absolutely total silence in the house. And then, a few minutes later, a perfume that I've never smelled in all my life, probably never will again, fills the house and stays for hours. And Mother teaches me that a great soul has just left. And the words come, I will never judge a person until I can see their soul. And when I see their soul, there will be no need to judge. Yeah.
Lovely.
One day, there was I think Patrice, maybe somebody, one of the French boys was doing interview videos, and he caught me outside the solar kitchen, and he said, could we talk a bit about the garden? So I did that. It was put on film. So I'm getting up to leave, and then there's a little wall there, and there's two girls with babies, each holding a baby, and they lean over and grab me and kiss me. And they said, and it was Kalia and Kriya, I think, the two
Bernard
Borg's daughters.
Okay.
And they said, we were your students in the gardening class. Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
See how beautiful.
Kali and Durga.
Yes. Well, let me see if I've missed anything. Well, I never had a difficulty with Roger. Somehow we always worked together. And when I planted the outer areas, he was very, very happy. Very happy. He said, that's what I want to see. Oh, let's see. We had a first Oroville choir in the Matramanda Gardens under the banyan tree. We did have a serious problem, and I guess I should talk about this on the banyan, because for me the most sacred tree in the world is the service tree, and the second most sacred tree is the banyan. And they have to be cared for. If we have to give our lives to it, it's no price at all to pay for caring for those trees. So there was another group in charge when I left, and when I came back, Roger says to me, they've made a prison of the banyan tree. When they had no work for the workers, they would say, go out and bring more roots down from the banyan. And the thing was like, it was a prison. Roger was right.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, I will study this whole thing. I will find those roots that do not belong, and we will remove them. Well, there was a group against this. They wanted that. And they sat and they would chant these evil chants to kill me. And I had people with me. Roger came, the, what do you call him, man in charge of Aurobindo? The Indian,
secretary?
The secretary came,
Right.
and they stood with me. And then many, many Aurobillian women came and stood between me and this group until we removed all the unnecessary roots. Because the banyan tree is a dry climate tree, and they were watering it like anything to keep grass under it. Well, there's grass under it now, but you do not water these trees. That's not the way. And so it took over a great part that would be the garden of life.
Right.
So now I will have to design within the root, the aerial roots for the garden of life. It will work, and Mother will give us that knowledge. But the interesting thing at the end, I think there were a total of 28 necessary roots. Aurobindo's birthday.
28.
20, yeah. So.
And Mother had a very special relationship with this banyan
Yes,
tree as well.
especially when that person threw, I believe it was a machete into the trunk, and the tree came to her.
Yeah.
She actually sent
I think it was
one of her secretaries, right?
on the inauguration.
Yes,
when
it
they were
was.
preparing the exhibition.
It was, yeah.
They had nailed, certain things into the tree, and
Yes,
the tree came to her.
and then threw that
Yes.
axe or machete into it.
Yes.
I don't know who she sent out, maybe Nava, to remove it. I don't remember. Well, other than many, many travels around the world, one which I have to tell you, because it was when we went to Japan, we were collecting plants for the Machamandia Gardens. And we went to so many different places, came back via Singapore with 300 kilos, and they looked at us, and you can't bring this, in. But Devon Nair was a disciple, and he let them through.
Okay.
We came with so many things, but when we're in Japan, we go to the temple in Kyoto that Mother loved. And there's a monk there, and he takes us all around the buildings and the gardens, and in the most perfect English I've ever heard, tells us the history of all of them. So I'm blown over by it all. And I ask him, may I come back tomorrow and talk to you? I have a few questions. Yes, come. 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock, I put my fist on the gate, and he opens it. And so I go into, I'm very, very happy to meet you, blah, blah, blah. Wait, no English. No English. I'm totally confused. He takes me over to the first building, and there's a huge bronze plaque where an Englishman had taught him to memorize. So then I have to speak very slowly. And I saw a pine tree. It's about 90 feet high. For the first 40 or 50 feet, it was wrapped in bundles of straw. I had never seen anything like that. So I said very simply as I could, "Sir, tell me about pine tree." He said, "Pine tree sick. Give medicine. 200 years more, okay." Wow. He was in his late 60s, right?
Wow.
Yeah. That sense. Oh, it's beautiful. So beautiful. Yeah. tell me a little of your experience in those first days of Aurobindo when you were in aspiration.
Well, that was, as I told you,
Yeah.
I was selected by Purna to work with her and Varun Tagore at Auro Press. And for me, it was kind of the fulfillment of a very, very long cherished dream to be that little bridge as well, between the ashram and
Yes,
Aurobindo.
yeah.
And so I was absolutely thrilled with the idea. And I began working in Auro Press, and I had to cycle out from Pondicherry twice a day because I would come down to the dining room for lunch and then cycle back after lunch. And there was so much joy, There was so much joy to put all that love and energy into this work, because I felt I was doing it for her, and to do my little bit, to make her dream come a little closer to fulfillment. So there was absolutely no sense of fatigue or there was such an enthusiasm, And then, like Mother puts you to test, how sincere and deep-rooted is your, aspiration and faith in that dream.
Yes.
And so probably the worst years of Aurobindo began. And Auro Press was a very important point.
Where was it?
In aspiration.
In aspiration.
In aspiration.
Okay.
And it became a very, very focal point of the conflict between this group of Aurovillians and Auro Press kind of became a little outpost of the Aurobindo Society, and I felt so uncomfortable in this division, and in this, absolutely the dream I felt was crumbling before my eyes, And it was around the same time you left, I left finally. And
Early 80s.
Yes, late 70s,
Late
79,
70s.
yeah.
Okay.
I left because I couldn't bear to see the presence of police and
yes.
sarcastic cartoons on the walls, and this whole group of disgruntled Aurovillians were completely losing control over their conduct, and very, very unbecoming, I thought, of Mother's children to behave in that way And so I left, and I fell in the lap of Gentilalda, who for me was an absolutely, the most worthy sadhak, I could have fallen in company of, and I started working at the archives, and it was lovely.
Ooh.
And a number of years where I just could not go back to Aurobindo because I was seen as, somebody who had supported, that side.
That side, yeah.
So. And so for a long time, and these were people, we used to take food for, in aspiration, these French Aurovillians. They were very close friends, and to me it was very painful to see these friends who were looking at me like their enemy, And in fact, Purna and Varun also, didn't talk to me for years because I had left. And but Mother had put me in the archives, and I found again that very international air that I was so happy to be in Aurobindo. I found that same air with people like Bob and Richard and Sue, and there were Indians, there were French people.
Yes.
So I was very, very happy to be working. And
Ranga?
No, he wasn't.
He wasn't there yet?
No, he wasn't there yet. But Peter and Bob, and I worked a lot with Bob and Peter, and it was wonderful to see all that dedication and all that minute attention to, I was lovely, to be going up to that space where Mother had lived herself in the first years when she came. So it was a beautiful, Mother always makes these transitions so soft and thoughtful. So, but the attachment to the dream has survived,
Yes.
and there's not a single week when I don't go to Auroville. I'm there, and I feel
Wonderful.
a beautiful energy still.
And you're building this lovely place.
And Mother has, helped
Yes. Yes.
bring presence
Presence.
up
Yes.
on the ground, and I think that too is a very significant symbol. There was this wonderful story you just mentioned about this monk
Yes.
recognizing in this man
Yes.
that he was part of another nest. And I went to this place which is midway between Chennai and Auroville. It's a place called Melbavatur. And there was this Indian couple from America that wanted to visit this man who is known as Adigal. And he had set up this expanding kind of space in Melbavatur. And he would, I think thrice a week, he would come out of this room and he would address all the people who had come to see him. And I was there standing with this Indian couple from America, a little bit in the front to the side. And he came out and he looked around, and then his eyes kind of stopped in our direction. And then he called a gentleman who was standing next to me, who was the president of the society. And so he went over to him and he whispered something into his ears. And he came back and he said he wants to see you. And so I go to him, and he had this branches of the neem tree, spiritual atmosphere.
Yes.
And he blesses me with this neem tree leaves, and he gives me a smile, and I go back, and he doesn't say a word that day. He goes back into his room. And so the president turns to me, he said, this has happened for the first time, that he has not spoken today. I said, well, I don't know. I said, what did he tell you? He said, I'm very happy to see that man there. Call him. It's amazing. I suppose people who are open
Yes.
probably recognize this protective aura of Aurobindo and the mother,
Yes.
and out of probably humility and respect, he did not wish to speak.
Yes. Wow.
You know.
Partho told me a story. I interviewed him recently. He's now working for the Integral Life Center at Oro University.
Okay.
He said that he, was searching a lot, traveling there, and he found this man. And I don't know the Sanskrit terms fully, but I can tell you the gist of it. So he comes, he finds this great soul, older man, and he says, I want to be your disciple. And the man says, I'm sorry, you cannot be my disciple. You are already claimed by Maharishi Sri Aurobindo.
Yeah.
Out someplace. They all know.
Yes.
They all know Mother.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I couldn't find that paper, but I'll find it tomorrow or the next day whenever we're together, in which we write a letter to Mother about many people who want to join the nursery.
Mm-hmm.
Frederick and Shama
Right.
and others. Mother writes and asks for her blessings. If people are truly wanting to work in harmony, there is no need for my blessings. Wonderful, Maurice.